Alors, bonjour.
Good morning, members of the committee, and good morning to Madam Goodridge and Mr. Garon, who are with us today, and Mr. Weiler. Can't forget Mr. Weiler, who's been on the committee until recently and who was very involved in this file. Good morning, Mr. Pusher. Thank you for being here with us this morning. We appreciate it greatly. I do not know whether you have any comments to make for us.
Or do you just want to go straight into questions? You're on mute, I believe.
Good morning. I have an opening statement. I would just note that I'm not receiving any translation from your remarks.
There's an icon there should be an icon on the screen where you choose English or French.
Interpretation.
Alors, donc vous n'entendez rien.
So you're not hearing interpretation at this time? You're not hearing any English? Test 1, 2, test 1, 2. But you understood me.
Mais il n'y a pas d'interprétation.
So you're not receiving interpreting, or you are?
Okay, parfait. Alors, ça fonctionne.
Okay, so it's working? It's working? Excellent. And before we begin, I would simply like to mention that sound tests have been conducted.
Tout est...
Point of order, point of order. Everything is in compliance. Yes, Ms. Goodrich. You're on mute. I did not have any sound tests. No sound tests were done with me for the moment. Just a moment then. We will take a moment. Thank you for pointing this out to us. So we'll take a little break for about 60 seconds to allow for the sound tests. I'd ask for your indulgence. And so everything is now in order. I don't know whether before you begin, Mr. Pusher, if you would like to introduce the person who is seated to your right.
Our legal counsel, whose last name just escapes me. Sorry. McDowell. Sorry.
Okay, thanks. That's good. Thanks very much. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Pusher.
Good morning. As I begin today, I want to acknowledge that I am speaking from Treaty 7 lands. The Alberta Energy Regulator, its staff and offices are located on the traditional territory of Indigenous communities, including Cree, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe First Nations, and the Métis. My name is Laurie Pusher. I'm the CEO at the Alberta Energy Regulator. When I appeared before you in April, I began my remarks by providing a timeline of the events at Curl and the significant activities that were taking place under the AER's Environmental Protection Order. Today, I will continue to provide the committee with updates on these activities, all of which are publicly available on our website and shared with Indigenous communities in a weekly update from the AER. Before I begin, I must speak about the investigative position of the AER as it relates to today's committee discussion. Like the Canadian Energy Regulator, the AER is an arm's-length regulator that is tasked with quasi-judicial powers to enforce relevant government legislation and policies. Today's focus of discussion, the two incidents at Curl, are currently under investigation by the AER. And as these incidents continue to be under an active investigation, it is of the utmost importance and in the public interest that we seek to protect the integrity of the investigation. This includes through today's conversations, as statements made here may also form part of the record. As such, where it is required to protect the integrity of the investigation and any future potential legal action or regulatory proceedings, I will refrain from commenting on those matters. As I move into today's updates, it's critical to address one of the key topics discussed in April's committee meeting regarding water quality. Repeating what I shared in April through data collected by the AER, the Government of Canada, Imperial, and Environment and Climate Change, the Government of Alberta, and Environment and Climate Change Canada, there was and remains no evidence that drinking water was at any time impacted by the events at Curl. And no one should seek to falsely alarm Canadians by perpetuating narratives contrary to the scientific data and evidence before us. I would like to acknowledge the rural municipality of Wood Buffalo for their commitment to their communities. They have and continue to provide reliable, safe drinking water. They continue to test at the intake to communicate transparently, posting their testing results to ensure their communities that they have access to safe water that fully meets safe drinking water standards of both the Alberta government and the Government of Canada. It is the mandate of the AER to ensure the safe, efficient, orderly, and environmentally responsible development of Alberta's energy industry. As we do this, and we do this under some of the highest environmental and regulatory standards in the world. It is under these strict standards that AER's technical experts continue to ensure diligent oversight of Imperial's actions to meet the EPO. This includes over 70 significant field inspections at the Curl site, additional information requests resulting in more than 450 submissions of information to the regulator. We've done extensive verification water monitoring by third parties to ensure the sampling results we're getting are accurate and reliable, including supported by Alberta Environment and Protected Areas. We've also reviewed numerous technical reports regarding the Curl site. At times, we've had up to 50 subject matter experts from our team working on information here. We have also transparently shared these reports, data, and information with the public and made them available on our website. I would also like to provide an update on the third-party review into AER's actions, processes, and communications surrounding the incidents. The Deloitte-led review has been completed and was made available to the public on September 27th. Deloitte's report confirmed that the AER followed existing policy standards and procedures and processes in response to the Curl incident. It provided recommendations on several improvements to AER's incident and emergency management system to bring it into line with leading practices and heightened expectations. The AER board has accepted and agreed to the report's findings and opportunities for improvement and has tasked AER management to deliver a detailed action plan to address these items. That work is advancing very quickly. The key recommendation was for the AER to collaborate with Indigenous communities and key stakeholders to develop specific notification and communication protocols, processes, and procedures tailored to meet their needs. We will engage and are doing so as early as next week with communities to work together to establish those new formal protocols. We remain committed to working alongside all parties to strengthen our processes, enhance our transparency, and broaden communications. This concludes my opening remarks.
Thank you very much. We'll go to the first round of questions, which is a 6-minute round, and we'll start with Mr. Deltel.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour.
Thank you very much, Chair. Welcome to everybody, and welcome to this session of the Environment Committee's work. The tragedy that we are discussing today should not remain silent, and we have to explore what happened in depth. What happened in Alberta should not happen again. And if it was unfortunate enough that it happened, we have to draw the conclusions and learn from this so that it can never happen again. And how was this crisis managed? We have to explore what happened. It's our duty to do so. And this is why we have already met with the first victims of the situation, the Indigenous communities, but also the head of Imperial Oil Canada. So I'd like to turn the floor over to the MP of the location where this happened, who is Leila Goodrich. Ms. Goodrich, go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the AER for being here. It's been 7 months since the last time you came to the committee to present. Unfortunately, I was not able to be there as my little baby decided to come about a month early. And so I missed your first appearance, but I have reviewed the transcripts. And I'm glad you touched on in your opening remarks about the Deloitte review and the suggestions. And I'm just wondering if you can go into further detail, because what we heard very clearly in the testimony was that communications was a huge failure. And so I would like to know specifics about what you guys have been doing and how you are moving forward to improve the communications aspects so that our communities understand what's happening in as close to real time as possible?
Well, thank you very much for that. It was made very clear to me in the first meetings I had with the communities shortly after the issuing of the Environmental Protection Order. I had the opportunity to drive up to Fort McMurray and then on up to Fort Chipewyan and sit with community leaders and councils. And they made it very clear that they wanted to be fully informed and expected to be informed, and that the fact they hadn't heard about it was of significant concern. From that day forward, we committed to providing weekly updates to the communities. We've done so since that time. I also committed to reach out to chiefs, Métis presidents, as well as the mayor of the RM, to alert them of things they should be aware of that were coming in the weekly reports. We proceeded with those calls right through and into the summer until, frankly, they asked me to stop calling, that the information was coming through their agencies well, and they were comfortable that the people in their organizations that needed to know what was happening were getting those updates.
So, but that's not, I was just wondering if, like, what processes, there were some processes, Deloitte pointed out that there were some processes that were clearly broken, and or that you followed your process, but the processes weren't necessarily up to the best standards as per different pieces. And so they've made suggestions. Are there any other pieces that you guys have concretely, any processes you've put in place to ensure that this communications failure would never happen again?
So we have been communicating extensively, not just in the northeast part of the province, but across the province, as we came to understand the expectations and build out some informal processes, if you will, or intern processes. What Deloitte is saying now is it's time to formalize those processes, and we will do that in consultation with the communities to ensure what we've been doing meets their needs. We'll also be, we have a contractor in place now to upgrade our website so that we can make much more information readily available in real time to any interested parties. Deloitte also suggested that we should look at our incident reporting and communications protocols, as well as our emergency management protocols, and there are some opportunities to continue to enhance those. We'll be doing all of that over the next few months. So
how can we expect to see the emergency response? Because I would anticipate that that's probably the most important piece. No one wants to see something like this happen, but if something like this were to happen again, how were we to be assured as a committee that AER would be proactively communicating with communities impacted, whether it's in the RMWB or somewhere else across the province? We're in a unique space where we have one municipal government, but there are many places, if it were to happen in southern Alberta, you might be dealing with 17 municipalities. How have you guys managed to come up with that process, at least in the interim? I'd like some detailed specifics if you possibly can.
So we have engagement specialists in each of our field centers, and they've been working with us to identify those agencies and organizations we should be communicating with. We've had relationships with them on an ongoing basis. The real question was, you know, what type of information should we be communicating proactively to them versus making available through our incident response website. Having said that, it's been very informative as we've communicated at much higher levels than in the past, and communities have been very frank in providing us feedback. So we feel like foundationally we've got good structures across the province, good contacts in terms of each community, in terms of who is best positioned to receive the information, and so on.
Just a quick question: do you have the member of parliament, do you have MLAs on your list of people to communicate? Because oftentimes when something happens, local offices like mine, like my colleagues, they are some of the front lines of getting some of these questions, along with mayors, chiefs, council. And if you're not proactively communicating with all layers of government, I would suggest that that's probably also a big failure.
Just a brief response, please, Mr. Puschel.
Well, thank you for that advice. We'll make sure we incorporate that into our procedures.
Okay, thank you. On passe maintenant à Madame Châtel.
Over to Madame Châtel now. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to give my time to Mr. Weiler.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Pusher, for joining our committee again today. This motion for this study was first launched, as Ms. Goodridge mentioned, 7 months ago, and we were seeking answers to a lot of the questions that we have, and unfortunately, the first meeting that we had, there were a lot of answers that the regulator wasn't willing to come forward with because of ongoing investigations that you mentioned were taking place, and that you didn't want to jeopardize the integrity of those. So first question I have is, when can we expect the investigation into the events with the two events at the Crow oil sands spill to be completed?
Well, as any investigation, whether it's at the AER or any other similar agency or enforcement arm of a police force, they are very independent. They will conclude their investigation when they believe they have concluded all of the work they need to do, and it will be, the determinations will be released at that time. There is a formal clock in the AER structure that says it must be completed within 2 years, and so we can expect, we're a few months away from the start of this, so we can expect it'll be somewhere in the next 12 to 16 months.
One report that we do have that was made public was at the end of September, that was commissioned by the AER for Deloitte to investigate the communications failure that took place. And as part of that, I understand that there was a second report entitled What We Heard document that captured the Indigenous concerns, but that wasn't made public. And furthermore, we've been informed by Indigenous communities that their input wasn't included in the recommendations of the report. Given that you paid for your own review into these events, why were the Indigenous voices silenced as part of this report?
Well, the Deloitte study was undertaken and managed by the board at the AER, not management directly. As part of those discussions, as I've been told, the Deloitte came back and said, we've heard a lot of interesting comments from the communities that they engaged with. As such, they had not, when they did those interviews, advised the communities that that information would be released. And so they felt an obligation to go back to those communities and ask permission to release it. The last information I received suggested they had not, at least at this time, received an okay from all of the communities to release that. So that's what I understand the situation is there.
In your testimony on April 24th, 2023, you mentioned that you had asked all mines to do an assessment of their facilities to determine if there's any indication that anything like this would be happening elsewhere. And we understand that the way that this tailings pond is constructed is quite similar to a lot of the other tailings ponds throughout the region. So I'm curious, what date did you ask these other companies to do that assessment, and would you be able to show us that request?
I certainly can. My understanding is we've received all of that information from the other mines across the region, and it has and continues to be reviewed by our subject matter experts.
Could you submit those assessments to this committee?
I believe there's no impediment to do that. If we haven't already made them publicly available, we'll certainly be pleased to.
Okay, and at this point, what companies have completed that assessment?
All of the companies.
Since the meeting that we had, we've recently found out that, in spite of concerns that have been brought forward by or in response to the Suncor facility, that there's been plans that have been accepted to build a tailings pond in a wetland by building a deep structure to separate those tailings ponds from the wetland. I was hoping that you'd be able to explain why these plans have been approved to go forward in spite of those very real concerns that have been brought forward that were not originally brought forward when it was initially looked at.
Well, first of all, to the chair, I was asked to come here to discuss the Curl incident, so I haven't prepared in any detail to talk about other mine sites. I can speak briefly to this one. The Suncor mine, when it was approved by a joint federal panel, approved the mining into the region that you're discussing and talking about. I would say it is to mine that region, not to build a tailings pond there, is my understanding. What was recently approved was the operational plan by which they would mine that area. And we were asked to review and reconsider whether that was a sound decision in terms of the operational plan. Independent statutory decision makers at the AER reviewed again the information that was provided, requesting the review, as well as their original decision. And of course, these were different decision makers than the original decision makers, and considered that given that the area was approved to be mined by the joint federal provincial panel, that the operational plan was sound and did not proceed with the review.
Thank you. Monsieur Garon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Caron. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Mr. Pusher. When you came to this committee last April, you explained that an independent review has been mandated to a third party. 9 months later, the report was published, and this was a very brief report, 14 pages long, which limited itself to the communications processes surrounding the incident. The mandate was quite limited. This is not a big mandate. And you were not in a position to question the employees of the Alberta Energy Regulator to know where the problems began. Are we to understand, or what we understand, is that what isn't in the report, in other words, that there were no procedures in place to determine whether it was an incident, whether it was an emergency, there was no clear protocol for communications, for how to, the modus operandi was rather ad hoc and random, and the conclusion being that the AER complied with regulations. Well, it's easy to comply because there wasn't much to comply with. So this implies that by giving a mandate to a third party, such as Deloitte, a company which is going to deal with you in the future, so they're not independent. If they're not ready to have the results, if you're not ready to have the results of a true inquiry where transparency would have gone to the heart of the problem, why did you decide to give such a limited and restricted mandate to Deloitte? Why not choose to mandate differently, in other words, with a retired judge or a quasi-judiciary commission? Why deal with a company that you're obviously going to continue to do business with afterwards?
Well, I'd remind the panel that the board of the AER conducted this review. They used an open public request for proposals process and selected the vendor they believed best met their interests and criteria. The board advised me that their interest was in ensuring we looked at, through this study, our processes and procedures around communication and incident management. And that was the scope of the proposal that I mentioned in April. And it's included in very public documents around the RFP and the terms of reference and so on. What Deloitte does in a matter like this is not unlike independently contracting an auditor, and I would respectfully challenge you, someone who sits as part of a government that uses Deloitte extensively, I am sure, that we can be confident in Deloitte's integrity, and they conducted a thorough review, including reviewing all of our documented policies and procedures, including interviewing internal staff at the AER, as well as going beyond that to talk to the communities to ensure they understood what the community expectations were.
En tout respect, Monsieur Pocher, moi je suis pas.
With all due respect, Mr. Pusher, I'm not a member of the government, and I can assure you that the Bloc Québécois does not do business with Deloitte. I recently listened to an interview of Professor Martin Olszewski, from a legal professor in Calgary, about environmental law. It's not political. He knows what he's talking about. He said this investigation should have been given to a quasi-judicial board. And the consequence is that this inquiry is lacking credibility and can affect public confidence. And I think that the parliamentarians are part of the public when it comes to this. Do you believe that Professor Olszewski is mistaken?
I'm sorry, I missed the question there. If you could repeat the question, please.
Monsieur le Président, est-ce que je peux avoir mon temps là-dessus?
Chair, can I have my time for this? Yes. What I was saying is that, first of all, I was pointing out that the Bloc Québécois has not dealt with Deloitte, and I'm not a member of the government, so I have no trust relationship with Deloitte. On the contrary. And there was a recent interview of Professor Martin Olszynski, who is an environmental law professor at the University of Calgary, specialized in these very issues. And he pointed out that, in his opinion, the AER should have given this mandate to a quasi-judicial inquiry. It could have been a retired judge, for example. And what was being said is that the fact that you proceeded in the way that you did with Deloitte removes credibility from the investigation and leads to negative consequences for the trust that the public and members of parliament can have in this investigation. Do you disagree with Professor Olszynski's words? He's a professor of environmental law.
The professor you mentioned often comments on the work of the AER. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree. In this matter, it isn't a matter of agreeing or disagreeing. We are interested in moving diligently to enhance our communications protocols and incident management protocols, and we will move diligently to do that. And the proof will be in whether or not we meet community expectations, including all of you.
Il me reste combien de temps, Monsieur le Président?
Et demi.
Monsieur Pocher?
How much time do I have left? I'd like to come back to a question that Mr. Weiler raised earlier. You stated that your organization is committed to improving relations with First Nations and communications as well. We know the third report was tabled called What We Heard, which dealt with concerns of Indigenous communities involved, and this report has not been made public. It also seems that the comments received were not included in the recommendations of the report. Why did you make the decision not to publish this report?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Deloitte initially had not, this is what I've been advised at least, is that Deloitte initially did not make it clear with communities that they would summarize their comments and release them. And so upon completion of their work, they felt there was some important commentary there that has been provided to us. But before it be released publicly, the board and Deloitte felt it was appropriate to seek approval from those communities to release that information.
Donc, basé sur ce que vous nous dites, vous êtes encore d'avis que Deloitte...
Based on what you said, you are of the opinion that Deloitte did a good job and they were the right firm to give the mandate to?
As I indicated, the board has managed this process. They used an open public request for proposal process and selected Deloitte as the preferred vendor through that process.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go to Mr. Bachrach now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd like to start by noting that the last time this committee heard testimony on this issue, one of the witnesses was Chief Alan Adam from the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation. And while Mr. Adam was here at the committee meeting, he received news that his father-in-law had been diagnosed with bile duct cancer. Of course, this is the rare cancer that has affected so many families in Fort Chipewyan. And we recently learned that since that time, Chief Adams' father-in-law has passed away. And I'm sure my colleagues here today will join me in expressing our sympathies to Chief Adam, his family, and his community. Much of the discussion on this topic has focused on communication, but that's only one of the issues of concern here. The other issue is the issue that downstream First Nations have been raising from the very start, which is the likelihood that toxic tailings water is seeping into the environment around the Curl site and affecting not only the environment, but those people downstream. And my first question to Mr. Pushar is whether he can confirm that indeed downstream First Nations have been expressing that concern from the very beginning.
I think there's a number of factors, and certainly I have had the opportunity to visit Fort Chipewyan a couple times since this incident and sit with community leaders. I've spoken with Chief Adam regularly throughout the last few months. I too share concern and would pass along my sympathies to Chief Adam and his family for the loss of his father-in-law. Our job as a regulator is to ensure the industry is meeting the standards, the environmental standards that are set forth by the government, and that is the role we play.
The question was a very simple one. Have First Nations been expressing concern since the very beginning that toxic tailings water is seeping into the environment around Curl?
So what I was saying was that, yes, I've had the discussions with communities there and have heard those concerns from some within the communities. As I indicated, the standards that are monitored by Environment and Climate Change Canada and Alberta Environment and Protected Areas, as well as communities through joint oil sands monitoring, has shown no impact on the rivers, muskeg, firebag in this case, that both feed into the Athabasca River system. As it comes to health determinants, I understand that Alberta Health and Health Canada have done some examinations into things, and in terms of sorting out the cause of various health problems in the region, I would defer to those agencies.
Mr. Pushar, when did the Alberta Energy Regulator first become aware that toxic tailings water was likely leaching into the environment surrounding Curl?
May 2022 was the first indication that there was some staining on the land and some vegetation damage. And then we have previously outlined and is contained in the Environmental Protection Order what occurred between then and the issuing of the Environmental Protection Order. I can happily go back and review that with you if you'd like.
Pushar, you'll be familiar with some reporting by the Canadian press that included an interview with Mandy Olsgaard, who's an environmental toxicologist. And she's consulted for Area First Nations and has reviewed the annual reports that Imperial provides to the Alberta Energy Regulator. And she told the Canadian press that the Alberta Energy Regulator knew there was seepage to groundwater. Is she wrong?
The report she's referring to is part of the containment system that any earthen dam is required to perform. So as we've talked about in the last gathering, the earthen structures are expected to allow some movement of seepage through the dam structure. That is in place on any earthen structure across Canada for sure. What is important is that monitoring be done so that as seepage moves through, there's an interception system, a series of wells or other interception devices that can collect that seepage and move it back into the containment pond. The results that I believe are being referred to in your comments are in fact the results within that containment system that was showing it was moving, and therefore the company began to intercept that through their containment system. Their containment system.
So Ms. Olsgaard has gone through the 2020 monitoring annual report and highlighted in yellow all of the exceedances, all of the test results that exceed provincial parameters. And on some pages, the entire page is yellow. Does this not indicate a problem?
As I said, I believe all of those results are within the containment system and were indicators that it was time to turn on the wells and the pumping systems to ensure that seepage was intercepted and returned to the tailings pond.
But as we know, like in May 2022, there was this discovery of discolored water outside the containment system, which indicated that the water had breached that containment system. And it was likely that this had been happening for some time. You've now required Imperial to drill a number of wells, I believe over 100, in addition to the containment system. And assumedly those wells are outside the containment system. How many wells have you required Imperial to drill?
A brief response, please, Mr. Pusher.
To date, there's been in excess of 100 wells for both interception and monitoring purposes that have been installed.
Thank you. We'll move to the second round. Is it Ms. Goodridge again who will lead? Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Goodridge.
Thank you once again. And I think to tee back up on some of the questions that I was asking earlier regarding the fact that, like myself as the local member of parliament, I don't remember getting any communication from the AER, but I do know that our constituency office received quite a few people writing in, asking questions. And I think that it just goes to show that communications with more people are always better, especially in situations like this. But what is your standard process for when something hasn't gone wrong and you are just working on something? How do you communicate with communities, with community leaders outside of a serious incident? Because I think that is important to understand. Have your processes changed in the last 7 months? Like, what exactly were you doing 7 months ago that you are not doing today, or that you are now doing that you weren't doing 7 months ago? I think Canadians deserve to know what's the difference. And if you can possibly give as much specifics as possible, this is really going to help us.
Well, thank you for that question. Maybe I can start by saying, an emergency management response includes communications, and all companies are expected to have those. And so as we look at emergency response protocols, we will review whether more needs to be done independently by ourselves as a regulator, in addition to what is expected in an emergency response. When we get to incidents are a broad categorization. We have in excess of 1,700 matters that we look into on an annual basis. And so the conversation with the communities has been really helpful in the Northeast, as they've helped us sort out what is it that they need to see immediately, and help us give some protocols and some structures so that we can identify those things. We've certainly erred on the side of communicating more rather than less, but communities have also made it clear to us they don't want to be overwhelmed. And so the next part of our work, we have an incident dashboard, but we need to make it much more accessible and much more visible. And so as we look at rebuilding our website, that's one of the key priorities there, so that not only are we doing proactive, alert people about significant incidents that matter to them, but also that we're making sure they can access any and all matters that they might be interested in.
So how long can we expect before your website is updated?
My preference would have been by today, but these things do take time. So over the course of 2024, we expect to have it fully implemented. In the meantime, we have been doing the interim communications protocols, and we'll continue to do that. We've also been working with interested communities to help guide them to the current incident website and help them understand the information that is there. So we can proactively do that with anyone who's interested in learning more in this interim period.
Thanks. So there's been already a little bit of a narrative that's developed here in this committee surrounding the drinking water and the safety of the drinking water. And I know, living in Fort McMurray and having lived here most of my life, I know exactly where to go to find out whether our drinking water is or isn't safe. But I was just wondering if you could point to share with the committee, where would people go to if they are concerned about drinking water quality in this region?
Well, I might not be able to be specific about the specific address, but the rural municipality of Wood Buffalo has extensive information on their water testing at water intakes, as well as their performance in operating their water treatment facilities. I thought it was insightful to listen to the Chief Executive Officer of the RM talk about the fact that they've got safe drinking water into all of their communities, which I think is something to be acknowledged of the good efforts they've made there. In addition to that, Environment and Climate Change Canada, Alberta Environment and Parks and Communities do joint river quality monitoring. That website is available, I believe, through the Oil Sands Monitoring Group would be the way to find it. And I'm happy to send those links back to the committee to ensure you get the specific locations.
Yes, if you could send them specifically, and I guess just because I am the local member of parliament, I will share with everybody. It's actually the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo. And if you go on to rmwb.ca and go water quality, it'll share all of the information, as well as there's the Wood Buffalo Environmental Association, where it has all of the information being captured on water, air, and land quality throughout this entire region. And I think that that's critically important to highlight, that we do have a lot of this information available. And this is why it is so important for an agency like yourselves to be communicating regularly with a variety of different stakeholders, because when this was happening, there was a lot of fear in the community.
Thank you. We're a little bit over time here, and so we'll have to go to Mr. Longfield for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witness for being back at our committee. In your last testimony to us, you claimed that there were no contaminants found in the waterways, and in fact, in the previous discussions, we're talking about that even today. Given that statement, how do you explain that prior to your testimony that Imperial staff had told ACFN inspectors that dissolved iron was found in water body 3, and then on April 3rd, 2023, that a test showed F2 hydrocarbons and naphthenic acids in water body 3. And then on March 10th, 2023, ECC said that the waterway had become deleterious or harmful to fish. And we are also seeing a high incidence of bile cancer. In fact, having Chief Adams' father-in-law passing away, but 17 other people have passed away because of bile cancer. The normal incidence is 1 in 100,000, so it's a rare cancer that's affecting. You mentioned that public health is looking at it, or health is looking at it. But all of the information has been available prior to our last meeting. So why were we not made aware of that, given the opportunity you had to speak to that, and in fact today as well?
Well, as I indicated, the monitoring that is done on the Firebag, Muskeg, and Athabasca rivers is collaborative monitoring involving Environment and Climate Change Canada, the Environment and Protected Areas Department of Alberta, as well as local communities. When you examine that data, you will not, I am advised that there is no anomalies or no indications that anything from the Curl situation made it to those water bodies, and that's what I was referring to. In addition to that, we have compelled Imperial to do increased monitoring along the Firebag to ensure that we keep a close watch on any suggestion that something might be happening there. Most importantly, we've done an extensive requirement for them to drill monitoring wells and continue to monitor what's happening in the groundwater, and we'll continue to keep very close eyes on that. When the water body 3 naphthenic acid and F2 hydrocarbon results were shown, it was for a very brief period of time in one part of that water body. Water body 3 is an integral part of the approved mine plan, but because they haven't commenced using it yet, we expect them to preserve it as a healthy wetland. Steps were taken immediately to protect that water body, and also to ensure that a fish barrier was put in place so that the migration of the minnows that exist in that water body couldn't occur. And monitoring was enhanced, and it's fair to say that water body returned to stable, healthy, all within the standards testing throughout the summer.
But it's also worth noting that it's reached Muskeg. How do you account for the Muskeg leakage, and how is that remediated?
I'm not sure what you're referring to. There's no evidence that any of the tailings seepage has reached the Muskeg River. Okay,
I have alternate information on that. If we look at the design in the first place, one question I had back in April was how many other tailings ponds could be experiencing the same problems, and where this tailings pond was designed to have vertical leakage, but now the leakage is happening going sideways, that common fill was used versus clay fill, which was a cheaper option, and now the leakage is coming out sideways where it wasn't designed in the first place. And so we have French drainage systems being installed, pumps being installed. We're trying to, after the fact, try to pump the tailings fluids back into the tailings pond faster than it's getting out of the tailings pond. The 150 wells that have been drilled haven't found the edge of the seepage yet. That the wells, we don't have a well that isn't reporting seepage. So in terms of other properties in Alberta, have any other properties reported any other problems to you that we need to be aware of?
As I indicated in April, one of the steps we took early on after the EPO was issued was to ask all other operators or compel all other operators to do an examination of their tailings ponds with an eye to what we understood was happening at Curl and to provide us a report on their assessment based on that. We continue to look through all of that. It's encouraging at this point, but we will stay very vigilant to ensure we understand what's happening across the region.
Merci. C'est au tour de M. Garon. Vous disposez de 2 minutes et demie.
Thank you, Mr. Caron. You have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Pusher, I'd like to get back to what my colleague was saying, Mr. Backrash. 4 drilling bits were made to counteract the over 1 billion liters of groundwater that were seeping. From March 2022, we see that samples of sulfide were 18 times higher than in 2021. Now, from the point of view of the average intelligent person on the street, it's difficult to believe that you didn't know there was a problem.
We have received information. It was the report of some staining on the ground that caused us to heighten our oversight of what was happening in this area and to compel Imperial to take extensive actions to identify the source of this. I think it's important that as we talk about these things, we remember that there were 2 incidents at Curl. One was an incident involving tailing seepage. The other was an overflow from a containment pond. Containment ponds are intended to hold water that is runoff or snowmelt from across the mine site to ensure that it is in a good state before it's released from the mine site. And so I'm not sure of the volumes the member is responding.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je comprends. Le temps nous est...
We don't have very much time, and so very briefly, my colleague Mr. Longfield alluded to the fact that on April 3rd, 2023, tests indicated that they were F2 hydrocarbons, nitric acids in the same water body. And you keep repeating that water is healthy, that water is clean. Are you telling us that none of these substances has any negative impact on human health?
I'm telling you that the monitoring results we've seen around the entire Curl tailings pond and in water body 3 are stable or declining, which is what we would want to see as we examine the effectiveness of the enhancements to the containment system. But we will be diligent for a long period of time monitoring this to ensure we can be confident that the enhancements to the containment system that were installed are working effectively, and then we'll contemplate what else needs to happen.
Merci.
Thank you. And now over to Mr. Backrack, 2.5 minutes.
Chair, Mr. Pushar, in your previous comments, you suggested that the exceedances that were noted in the annual reports were from within the containment system. And yet the information that I have indicates that there are very concerning trends in the monitoring results from outside the lease area. So this is in the environment outside of Curl's lease, or Imperial's lease rather, particularly increasing values for naphthenic acids in the off-site regional monitoring well. Don't these results in the off-site regional monitoring well indicate that both Imperial and the Alberta Energy Regulator were aware of and investigating contamination off-site?
Well, first of all, you're taking me into the circumstances that occurred prior to the issuing of the Environmental Protection Order. Everything in that body of work at that time is part of the investigation that is ongoing. I want to point out that we have inspectors who go out and review and examine things and take action as required to do things. But in addition to that, we have independent investigators that investigate whether any other proceedings should occur in an incident of this nature. I'm not able to get into specific details of what did or didn't happen. That is a part of the investigation.
Well, I'll just read from Imperial's 2021 annual report, which stated that process-affected water seepage or potential early arrival of such water was reported at 11 monitoring locations in 2021, indicated by trends and/or control objective exceedances in multiple parameters. And of course, those substances found at concentrations above desired limits include naphthenic acids, dissolved solids, and sulfates, a common proxy for hydrocarbon residue. Like it seems clear that the Alberta Energy Regulator was aware that there was contamination in the environment outside the lease area, have been aware of that for many years. And what I'm interested in is what actions have been taken by the regulator to stop that contamination. All of a sudden in 2022, when this discolored surface water shows up, it seems like the regulator flew into action and compelled Imperial to build French drains and all sorts of additional containment facilities, wells, pumps, in addition to the original design, which to me indicates that the system wasn't working, as you'd indicated earlier. That in fact there was a failure of the design that required this. And what we want to understand is how far back does this failure go? How long has toxic tailings water been seeping into the environment? And how much of that toxic tailings water has already made its way into these waterways and downstream? This is, I think, at the heart of the question we're trying to get at.
As I indicated to you, all of the conduct of Imperial would be a matter of our investigations in the two incidents in question, and so I'm not able to speak specifics.
Understood.
I would point out.
No,
to you,
so Mr. Pusher, we're really over time here. It doesn't mean Mr. Bacharach can't come back with this question or that you can't answer it in another context, but I really, in the interest of fairness, I have to stop there, and we'll go now to Mr. Cram.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Pusher for being here today. Mr. Pusher, in your opening statement, you talked briefly about the Deloitte report and how it recommended that the Alberta Energy Regulator collaborate with First Nations communities. Can you expand on that a bit, on what other recommendations were in the Deloitte report and how you are responding to those recommendations?
The Deloitte report contained in my way of interpreting the opportunities to strengthen and improve our processes, some 27 proposed areas we could work at. It divides into some pretty straightforward areas, communication being one of the most essential. So as we look at understanding what incidents matter to communities, that will be an important part of helping build some guidance so that we can understand in a more fulsome way what are the ones that they want immediate notification on versus ones that might be better housed in a much more accessible incident response platform, or incident information platform. And so we'll work through those criteria with communities. And the other important part is that we really want to build strong and healthy relationships with communities. So we've been communicating on a weekly basis in the Northeast. We've been tasking our engagement specialists across the province to make sure they're out and about and meeting the people who are interested in and have an interest in knowing about the work that we do and the work the industry is doing. And so we will continue to build those relationships and make sure we have methods and procedures to provide them the information they want to have and in the end access in a full transparent way to all of our information in this area.
So in this report, Deloitte gave you a list of 27 things to do, so to speak. Can you give us an idea how many of those 27 items you've started, how many you've completed, how many of them are ongoing?
Well, very consistent with an audit. We've tasked a team to build a work plan to attend to all of these things. That work plan is all but done. It's being reviewed by Deloitte right now, the same as an auditor would, to see if they believe it meets their expectations. In the meantime, we've done a lot of this work on an interim basis, and so we believe we have a lot of foundational work in place. This review, unlike many others, this response or this work plan will be managed out of the CEO's office to ensure that across the AER there's no no misunderstanding about the urgency and importance of getting this work done. And I would expect the vast majority of that work to be completed over the course of 2024. We also have said it shall not be do everything before you implement anything. And so, as I said, we have a number of things that we've implemented on an interim basis. And as we complete work, we will formalize and implement it and really build that culture of continuous engagement and continuous improvement.
And in a response to an earlier question, you referred to the joint oil sands monitoring between the Alberta Energy Regulator and Environment and Climate Change Canada. Can you speak to any changes that have been made on the federal government side by Environment and Climate Change Canada?
Well, the collaboration, and I'm sorry if I misrepresented things, the collaboration I'm referring to is actually between Alberta Environment and Protected Areas, Environment and Climate Change Canada, industry, and local communities. On an annual basis, they build a program of monitoring and investigations that they're interested in doing, and I'm not aware of what Environment and Climate Change Canada has or hasn't done in regard to their communications protocols. I know there was talk about the EDGE notification system and so on. I'm not familiar with any updates that have happened there.
Can you elaborate on the way the Alberta Energy Regulator and Environment and Climate Change Canada cooperate and collaborate with each other when an incident like this happens?
You know, we have always had a really open and collaborative relationship with Environment and Climate Change Canada colleagues at the field level. There's been an open and I think frank exchange of information to ensure that we all have the entire body of insight into any specific incident or matter. You know, and that's been ongoing for a number of years.
Thank you. We'll go now. We have 8 seconds left, so we'll go to Mr. Vancouver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Pusher, for joining the Environment Committee again. I imagine you're a very busy person. So just to recap, 5.3 million litres of industrial wastewater at the Coral Oil Sands operation just north of Fort McMurray has been seeping into groundwater and reaching surface water at the site since at least May of 2022. And in your April testimony, you provided this committee that there is no evidence that process-affected water, which is a technical term for contaminated tailing effluent, has reached the waterways. Now we know that's not the case. There's been contaminants found in water bodies, groundwater, muskeg, and tributaries of the Athabasca River, which is where members of the Athabasca Chippewa First Nations harvest food. And it's also flowed as far north as the Northwest Territories, and who are also not notified. And I'd note that since this crosses a territorial and provincial border, it's certainly a concern for this committee and the federal government. So why did you withhold those facts with respect to the contamination outside of the tailings ponds in your testimony in April?
Well, first of all, it's important to go back to the fact that there were 2 separate incidents at Curl, the first one being seepage from the tailings pond, the second one being an overflow of a containment pond. As we've reported openly and transparently, and you can find information on our website, and I spoke about it in April, the containment pond is a pond that collects snow melt and runoff and other water from across a mine site. It is important that water not be allowed to just run off the mine site, and so it is put into containment ponds. It is tested and monitored to ensure, among other things, total suspended solids are settled to an acceptable level that meet the expectation. It was that pond, the second incident that happened just at the time the emergency protection order was being prepared, that overflowed. It overflowed water that, while it may have some level of contaminants in it, it is predominantly runoff, as I indicated. It was minus 30 at the time of that event, and most of that water was captured in the containment system and or froze in close proximity to the edge of the mine site. As such, Imperial was able to recover the vast majority of that water and return it back onto the mine site into the proper ponds.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pusher. It's still clear that a lot of that effluent has reached natural ecosystems, and the Curl site disaster has highlighted the apparent inability for oil companies to responsibly manage their waste, which is quite frankly a disregard of the danger it poses to ecosystems and human health. And you acknowledged today in one response that leakage is actually anticipated with these earthen dams, as you put it. So contamination isn't actually a failure of the systems or your regulations. Leakage is actually a feature of them. Now, the Alberta Energy Regulator has continually referred to this as a communications problem, since you did not notify Indigenous nations of this incident for 9 months, leaving them unaware of the risks of consuming any of the water or the game harvested in this area. But these disasters ought to be prevented, not designed into the plans for resource extraction. So it's fairly clear to me that resources in Alberta have not actually been provided in a safe or environmentally responsible manner, which is, as you stated, your mandate. The Alberta Energy Regulator has refused to admit any wrongdoing or accountability to date. And at one point in your testimony, I read that you said that since the water, and actually you just repeated the fact that since water was frozen in wells, there's no way to test it. We're talking about an oil drilling company. Is there really no technology to test contaminated ice for dangerous chemicals?
I guess I'd start by talking about the earthen dams that you mentioned as seeming somehow to be unique to oil sands. They are not. Earthen dam structures are designed to allow
respectfully, sir, my question was with respect to ice and testing ice for contaminants.
I think you had several questions, so I'm going to do my best to address them in some order that you were raising them. So it isn't just unique to the oil sands that earthen dams allow seepage to move through them and have containment systems that intercept that seepage that protects the integrity of the structures. So we will continue to do our best to monitor across the piece on these matters. And I'm sorry,
that's okay, Mr. Pusher.
Distracted.
It's obvious to me that there's a lot of cleaning up to do around the Curl site and other sites, more broadly across the oil sands as well. And these tailings ponds has demonstrated they consistently pose serious risk to human and animal health. So my question to you is who ought to be accountable for these or future leakages? Do you think that ought to be a taxpayer obligation to clean up this environmental disaster? Or should the financial obligation be borne by the oil and gas companies such as Imperial, who have posted record profits just in the third quarter of 2023 for Imperial, over $1.6 billion? Who should pay to clean up this mess and prevent future leaks and harm to human health and the environment?
Very briefly, please, Mr. Pusher.
Well, Chair, I'm struggling a bit. You're asking me to respond very briefly to wide-ranging commentary far beyond the Curl matter that I was asked to come here to speak to. I'm happy to comment on that, but given the wide-ranging nature of it, I'm not sure what your thoughts are as Chair in terms of what's appropriate in this conversation, but I will try my best to respond.
Well, I think we're out of time, and so we'll have to move to the next. We're actually going to another round. I understand that at times the questions are wide-ranging, and but we have
point
time.
Of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Ms.
I appreciate that I am new on this committee and I am a sub, but it is generally a space where the person asking the question has a certain allotted amount of time to ask their question, and the witness is then given the same amount of allotted time to provide an answer. I think that it is.
That's not how it works here, but we have just basically a block of time, and the exchange occurs within that. But I think Mr. Pusher made his point, so in my view. But we'll have to go on now to Mr. Mazier.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know, Mr. Pusher, if you wanted to respond, keep on responding for a brief minute, and then I can get on with my questions.
The most recent commentary talked about mine reclamation, and I've had the opportunity to spend some time in the mine region, in addition to the 2 visits I've made to the Curl site over the course of the summer. And I would note that the companies work very diligently to ensure they're operating the sites in an effective way to operate in a way that allows for the best reclamation approach possible. It is clearly the obligation of the operator, the owner of the mine, to restore and fully reclaim the landscape once mining is completed. There's a mine financial security program in place in Alberta, and we oversee that it is being met under the terms of that program. So make no mistake, it is the operator of the mines that are obligated for their reclamation.
That clarification. Mr. Pusher, I think the trust is between the Alberta Energy Regulator and many communities has been broken because of a lack of communication. It's very concerning to hear about the failure to communicate with local communities and First Nations on this matter because so many livelihoods depend on Canada's energy sector. Many Canadians rely on Alberta's energy industry for good paying jobs and paychecks. When Canada's energy industry succeeds, Canadians succeed, in my opinion. So what have you done to regain the trust of Albertans, and what more do you plan to do?
Well, we've had the opportunity to visit the communities fairly regularly over the course of the last several months, and they've been generous with their thoughts and their advice and guidance to us. And so we're doing our best to learn from that and implement new processes and new protocols. When I've sat in the communities and heard people firsthand, it's been very helpful to have the right context and understanding of their interests in that regard.
Is there going to be opportunity for like what you heard? But I think like this is almost like a whole new world in communicating and trying to regain trust. Like you can go and meet with all you want, but communities at the end of the day are going to have to really realize that handshake does mean something for the regulator and for the community. Is there something that you can just point to, and like even for in the review that Deloitte has done in his communicating on? Is there something that really stood out to you? Thought, yeah, that is going to really, really help with us. Like you mentioned websites and things like that, but just really having an understanding of maybe what the communities require to regain that trust. Would that be is there something that you can point towards?
Well, as I indicated, we've been providing weekly updates to the communities up in the Northeast since February, late in February. We've undertaken to be face-to-face with those communities as a starting place so that when we know each other, we can start to build relationships where we can reach out and make sure we understand what is happening. We've had a good open exchange and dialogue around the information that are in those weekly updates. And in addition to that, we've posted all submissions we've received since the start of the EPO to our website so that those communities can also see all of that information. We've instructed Imperial to be engaged and providing all information to the communities as well. And that dialogue seems to be informing us and the communities of what information is available and the best way to provide it to them. And so, there's always work to do in this space, and we'll be open and engaged to do our best in that space. And I've been fortunate to be able to talk to several community leaders throughout the last few months, and they are very frank with me, and they will hold us to account. And the AER is committed to doing our best to meet those expectations, including your colleague from Fort McMurray's expectations that we do a better job of keeping her office informed.
What role does the federal government have in your operations?
None that I'm aware of specifically, but we do collaborate extensively where there's overlap between Environment and Climate Change Canada. So as we get into impacts on fish, wildlife, waterfowl, or any of the streams, we would have full and transparent exchange of information. As you know, in Alberta, initial notifications are done through a collaborative notification process called EDGE. Each receiving organization has its own protocols on what types of incidents they should be advised of. So Environment and Climate Change Canada has their protocols and expectations for the folks at Alberta Transportation who operate that notification system, as do we. And that's the first point of exchanging of information.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Pusher for being here again. I think one of the things I want to look at is the study that was done by Deloitte and why its focus was so narrow, given the extent of this disaster and the alarm and danger it has raised for many people that live in the vicinity, especially the First Nations that live in the vicinity of the tailings ponds. I remember my grandmother always used to say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and yet we're just focused on communications and emergency response as opposed to ensuring that these kinds of things don't happen. And I noticed in the report that Deloitte did that there was a synopsis of the First Nations testimony there. And one of the things that was said is that they asked or said was that they didn't feel that sufficient testing was being done or the right kinds of testing to actually understand the dangers of the wastewater that has seeped or gotten into the water, as evidenced by the very, very high, unprecedented incidence of bile duct cancer. So I'm wondering why Deloitte only focused on communications and emergency response, and why they weren't looking at what led to this happening in the first place. Because as my colleague Mr. Bachrach pointed out, in Imperial Oil's reports, they clearly showed that some of the limits for the effluent or the solids in these tailings ponds or in the area around them actually were being exceeded before this happened.
Well, first of all, the intent of the Deloitte review was to address the concern that was raised by communities about our role as a regulator in informing them of what was happening. And it's that specific area that the board was interested in addressing swiftly.
Excuse, can I just interject for 1 second just to ask you when you're responding to also respond? Because from what we heard at the testimony in April, it wasn't just regarding the lack of communication. It was really the whole incident. What we heard was they were very concerned about the leakage, not just the communication of what happened. So perhaps you could broaden your response to include that a little bit.
Well, I'm not sure who you're suggesting was talking about a review that was broader than our communications. What I was talking about was the board's interest in understanding the criticism that communities were giving the AER for our communications activities, and that's what the Deloitte report was intended to do. Our role as a regulator is actively underway as we speak, is to investigate and review these matters to the best of our abilities. And so we have a very large group of technical experts from across the organization who are working actively to examine all of the evidence in this matter, and they will release their findings. And we've committed to releasing those findings when those processes are completed.
There's no timeline on that. It's just whenever they're done within the next couple of years. But you, under the EPA, there's clearly responsibility for the AER to protect the public interest. And I understand that there was concern around the lack of communication regarding this seepage and these and the seepage and the overflow. But what has been uncovered since shows that there is a systemic, or appears to be a systemic problem with the design of these tailing ponds. And I'm just wondering what the Alberta Energy Regulator, what is being done to ensure that these kinds of problems don't continue to happen. Because from my understanding, most of the tailings ponds have been designed in the same way. So knowing now what's happened here, how will the Alberta Energy Regulator monitor or do different testing as requested by the Indigenous people, that the assessment processes are more robust to catch these things or to ensure that they don't happen at all?
You're very clearly asking me to speculate on things like root cause effects and so on. Those are all elements of any thorough investigation, and we will await the conclusion of the investigation that's underway on this matter, and all of that information will be made public when that's completed.
Merci, Monsieur Garon. À vous la parole.
Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Garon. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Pusher, one reason we may have doubts about Deloitte's report, I'm making an editorial comment here, is that everything that you do is based on data that is industry sourced, and it's a self-regulating industry, which is rarely, when you have a self-regulated industry, it rarely gives good results. So your organization suspended a long list of monitoring requirements during the pandemic. Your organization suspended this during the pandemic. So what does that say? And what about these measures that were suspended during COVID? Have they come back into force? Yes or no?
We were asked to review some 300 requirements of testing that people were unsure of what to do during the early days of COVID. We suspended 27 of those requirements where we felt the risk to human health caused by COVID.
Est-ce que parce que le temps est rare, vous contournez les questions, je comprends.
We don't have a lot of time, and you're getting around the questions. I understand that's part of the game, but are these back in force? Yes or no? It's a three-letter word in French. Yes or no?
Well, to the chair, I would just ask that I be allowed to complete an answer. The answer simply is they were reinstated. I believe they were suspended in April-May timeline, and they were reinstated by July, and that was publicly reported.
Merci. Combien me reste de temps, Monsieur le Président?
Thank you. With all of this, how much time do I have left? About a minute. Mr. Pusher, you talked about your relations with First Nations. And what about the Mikisew Nation? They called upon your organization and the Alberta government to implement measures so that curl operations could be paused. Given all of the facts that have been reported from over 12 to 24 months, you talk about seepage, we could talk about overflow or leakage. You could play on the words, but in the context of reconciliation with First Nations, why did you not support this nation's request?
Well, again, you are asking and implying information that relates to items that might be under investigation, and I think it's incumbent upon me to be thoughtful about not commenting on things that could impact the investigation. I would say I've had the opportunity to sit with Chief Tuckero on a few occasions and to be in the community. I understand their concerns, and we will continue to ensure the diligent oversight of the safe operation at the Curl site.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Pusher, you mentioned the 100 or so monitoring wells that Imperial has been required to drill since the problem was discovered in May. Is the objective of those monitoring wells partly to define the plume of contamination?
Yes, we believe initially the plume was well defined, but we will continue to enhance and strengthen all of our monitoring as we learn and understand more about the pathways and the groundwater movement.
Has the definition of the plume been defined at this point?
There has been a definition of the plume, but we continue to see test results that suggest stable or declining incidents. But we want to continue to enhance our understanding of what is happening on the ground there in the groundwater, and we will do that until we are fully satisfied that the matter is resolved in an acceptable manner.
And coming back to this question of whether toxic tailings water has made its way into the environment, and we've heard statements that didn't take place. I'm curious about wildlife. Now, there was this surface water that was discovered in May 2022. And I've seen photos of moose in the direct vicinity of that surface water. I'm curious when fencing was put up around the contaminated surface water after it was discovered. Could you provide the timing on when that fencing was installed?
I can tell you that to date we've found no evidence of impacted wildlife, fish, or waterfowl. As it relates to the specific timing, I'll get it to you and mention it along the way, but I know it was complete. It is completed at this time, and it was largely completed during the summer, and I'll get you the specific date here in a moment.
So the surface water was discovered, I believe, in February, and it was in the summer the fencing was installed? Is that the relatively the timeline?
We had Imperial install temporary fencing, but we asked that we compelled them as well to upgrade that to more permanent fencing until some date in the future when we're fully satisfied with the operations here.
Temporary fencing was installed in the summer, you said?
No, temporary fencing was installed very quickly. And again, I don't have the specific date in front of me, but it was in the February-March period for the most part. And then the permanent fencing was installed as we got into the summer.
Thank you. Mr. Cram.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Pusher, when you testified before the committee in April, you were not here by yourself. You were with representatives from Environment and Climate Change Canada. And since then, you've come back with the list of things to do from Deloitte. You have 27 items to work on that you've said that you'll be busy with for most of next year. I was wondering if you feel that there's any room for improvement on the role of Environment and Climate Change Canada, and would it be useful for the committee to hear back from them as well?
Well, I guess one thing that's a bit unique in this instance is that Environment and Climate Change Canada has advised us that they're conducting an investigation. Typically, they're pretty clear with us on what wildlife they've found, what waterfowl they found, what fish they've found, or the evidence that says there was an impact on a river. We haven't received that information, and so we're unclear what it is they're investigating at this time. So, you know, we'll continue to be in touch with them. We've been sharing our information quite transparently with them, and we'll continue that until we understand more fully the nature of their investigation.
Okay, now when it comes to the actual sites where the leaks occurred, can you walk us through what the Alberta Energy Regulator has done on these sites, or what you have done to make sure Imperial Oil has made changes on these sites? Like, what tangible examples do you have of work that has actually been done?
Well, the most important starting place was to get a clear understanding of what was happening and why the interception system wasn't stopping the seepage from moving beyond it. And so they identified 4 sites where that was occurring. In each site, we compelled them to put together a unique engineering approach or strategy as the best way to enhance that interception system to ensure it was collecting the seepage. That's involved extensive trench work. A lot of interception wells have been drilled and put in place. We've seen some installation of French drains. And in addition to that, as we became concerned in the spring with some of the tests we were seeing at Water Body 3, they put an extensive shallow vacuum system in right around the edge of Water Body 3 so that they could intercept closer to the surface water, which was thought to be where that water body might have been impacted by it. And so those systems are all operational now. The monitoring, as I've said, shows stable or declining test volumes in the area beyond that interception system, and we continue to ask Imperial to do that monitoring, but then also expand it beyond that. From time to time, you know, this part of the world does freeze up, and it does make it more challenging to do some testing, but we'll continue to ensure that that's done, and of course do everything we can to ensure that as breakup occurs next spring, we are highly in place and highly informed to keep an eye on what's happening in terms of Imperial's actions and operations of these systems to make sure Imperial's on the job, making the enhancements work the way they need to, and doing anything else that might be required if anything untoward identifies.
And I was wondering, from the perspective of the Alberta Energy Regulator, could you give us a bit of a before and after picture in terms of the changes that have been made, in terms of how you respond operationally when you first hear that a leak has occurred? Like, are there alarm bells that go off in your office, or how does the Alberta Energy Regulator respond?
Well, we have a long-established protocols, and Deloitte has some suggestions to enhance them, but we have long-established protocols. We have staff on call 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The EDGE notification system is staffed 24 hours a day. So when a call comes in through the EDGE system, it's triaged by the EDGE operators. The notifications we receive then go to our on-call person. The on-call person will then evaluate what they're dealing with, and more often than not, it's one of the wonders of the great team we have here at the AER. More often than not, they get in a truck and go out and have a first-hand look at the earliest possibility to see what's going on the site and make sure the response is appropriate.
Time's basically up. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Écoutez.
Thank you, Chair. For my entire career, I've worked with multinational corporations, and I understand that their number one goal is to optimize shareholders' assets and earn more profits. And that's fine. It's in their constitution. That's their mission. That's the board's mission. However, what's important to understand is that it's not necessarily profitable for an oil, gas, or mining company to prevent the release of chemicals and to prevent spills and to protect flora and fauna and even to repair soils after they have been degraded and to reduce pollution and manage solid or liquid waste and to prevent contamination of the environment. I'm saying this because it's important to understand that this is the role of governments and regulators. And we shouldn't hide that fact. There's a partnership, but we have to understand your role is to protect Canadians and the environment of Canadians, and you shouldn't shy away from that. What is of concern to me is that in October, Calgary University professors called for public review of the Alberta Energy Regulator because they described you as being too secretive and too much in the industry's pockets. So I'd like to understand how you can evolve to fully assume your role, your independence, and transparency in this very important mission of protecting Canadians and the environment for Canadians.
Well, if I could have some indulgence to provide some information requested earlier, the permanent wildlife fencing was completed May 15th, 2023. Relative to the comments you were just making, we as a regulator are committed to the highest level of transparency we can. Unfortunately, a lot of our information is quite technical in nature, so a big part of the work we're doing today is to try and understand how people want to consume information and then make sure that it's accessible easily through our website. I would note that when you talk about the University of Calgary professors, most of the information they are talking about was obtained through publicly available sources from the AER. So, we're doing our best to get all of the information out there and make sure people have a clear access to it, and good public discourse around matters of importance is always helpful. And so we welcome conversation about what should or shouldn't be happening in our space anytime.
But when they say that you're too close to industry, yes, of course you have to work together. We understand that. But do you find that your mission of protecting Canadians, the health of Canadians, the environment, do you find that this mission is compromised?
No, I don't. We have rigorous conflict of interest standards and protocols in our organization. We have clear expectations. And I would also reflect that there are 1,000 Albertans who come to work every day at the Alberta Energy Regulator with genuine passion and commitment for the work we do to ensure the industry operates at the high standards that the government expects them to. And I'm humbled to work with that group. They are diligent and committed and dedicated to fulfilling that mission. I would also note that they are dedicated and committed to openness and learning and growing and ensuring we get better every day. And so I'm confident in the work of the Alberta Energy Regulator. I can tell you that we have lots of dialogue with industry and they understand the expectations. And I would also challenge your opening suggestion that industry will not meet those high standards unless someone compels them to. I think the operators in the oil sands, the Pathways Collective, are committed to meeting Albertan and Canadians' expectations, and they're committed to doing the best they can to be the most responsible.
If I may say a word here, this is exactly the kind of comment that worries me. In the Constitution and bylaws of any company, the primary goal is to optimize profits. You can't be too naive. Of course, once you have standards and rules, Of course, they are full of goodwill, but they are accountable to their boards and their shareholders. And this really has to be understood. We can't be too naive, but there's a partnership. I'm not saying that they're not going to respect our regulations, but I think we can't be naive. Okay, we have to stop there to begin a fourth and last round. We'll begin with Ms. Goodridge.
Thank you. And I want to just thank you again for taking your time here today, Mr. Pusher, to clarify some of this information. Through these questions, we've seen a lot of what I would like to characterize as misrepresentation of what this industry is and isn't. And I would attribute some of that probably from my colleagues to the fact that they probably have never seen what the oil sands look like. They don't know what the reclamation looks like. They have no idea what a tailings pond looks like. They're going off of photos. And so once again, I am going to open it up. If any single person sitting around that table has an interest in coming and actually understanding a little bit better what this industry is and how much it contributes to the Canadian economy, Alberta's economy, and the hardworking people that make their living in this industry and provide the economic opportunities so that Canada can succeed, please reach out to my office. We will help plan a trip for you. We will make sure that you get to see what you are looking for so that you actually understand what exactly this tailings ponds are, what the dams actually look like, because it is hard to express and understand the scope and the magnitude of this sitting in your ivory tower in Ottawa. And that's with all due respect. As someone that was born and raised here and has 3 generations that have worked in the oil sands, I think that it is absolutely incumbent that people actually understand what this industry is and what it means to Albertans. And I don't think that has been shown in many of the questions that have been asked. And so I'm just going to reiterate, because I do think, Mr. Pusher, there is one important piece, and I would like, if possible, for you to really clarify beyond just, I've pointed out that you guys failed to communicate with elected provincial members and the federal members of parliament that represented this area. But I would assume, and I don't like to assume, but I would assume if I've been able to identify 2 players that you have not communicated with, that there are others. So I would ask you to do a more serious review to make sure that you are capturing all the people that need to be communicated with in the case of an emergency. Can you commit to doing that?
Yes, we will for sure. And I look forward to your advice and guidance in terms of any thoughts you have on where we should go looking for all of those people.
Well, and I would also welcome you, if you're ever up in the Fort McMurray region, give me a call. It would be lovely for me to be able to show you my hometown, because contrary to what many people think, Fort McMurray is not just a boom town. Fort McMurray is my hometown, and I am very, very proud of my hometown. And I do not want people from the other side of the benches, from the Liberals, the NDP, and the Bloc, to continue throwing bombs at the major industry that provides support to my community. And I think the failure of communication opened up a lot of doors. And frankly, that's unacceptable. And so I would hope that you guys are going to continue doing more. And I would just ask, in your final thoughts here today, do you have anything that you have learned that you will be doing better with the AER going forward?
Well, for sure. All things, and I guess maybe the better way to say it is, certainly expectations evolve and change over time. The historic protocols were always that industry should be the group as the responsible party doing the principal communications. But we certainly have come to understand that communities want to hear from us in our role as a regulator, as we do our best to ensure that there is compliance across the entire sector. And so we will without hesitation sit down with anyone and have conversations and hear their views and do our best to be transparent and to give information to people so that they can not only hear from us that things are as they are, but they can also see the information and data that causes us to believe that and form their own opinions.
And so, with all of that being said, do you think that Environment and Climate Change Canada should have been here today as well? Or do you think that it was is there other people that we need to be hearing from government other than just yourself as the regulator?
Quickly, please.
I think if the committee wanted to hear from Environment and Climate Change Canada, we've been transparent in sharing all the information with Environment and Climate Change Canada officials, and it may help the committee to hear firsthand from them their thoughts on the matter.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before I go on to Mr. Weiler, I should mention that in 2007, I spearheaded a study at Environment Committee on the oil sands and their impact on the Athabasca River watershed. And I did travel to Fort McMurray with the committee and went up in a helicopter to fly over the oil sands with the the member from Papineau, so it is really something to see. And the committee will be putting in a request to travel to Fort McMurray and to Curl, hopefully in the spring, and up to Fort Chip as well. So we'll go to Mr. Weiler, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was disappointed that committee travel request wasn't approved last time, so that we were able to go visit some of the sites that we're talking about today. But I have to say I find it deeply disturbing that the members from the Conservative Party are really just framing this as a communications issue. And we're talking about millions of liters, in this case, of toxic tailings that are spilling into the environment. Mr. Pusher, earlier on in my line of questioning, you mentioned that all the companies had submitted an audit of their tailings facilities. And could you answer or could you confirm rather, that all these containment systems are in fact working, or are there any leaks that you're seeing?
Well, as I said, we continue to review and follow up with companies in that regard, but to date, I'm advised that all of the tailings pond systems seem to be working as intended.
Okay. On October 9th, the AER reported a leak of 662 cubic meters from the Fort Hill site, which is a site, of course, that you've approved to expand in spite of the impact that it's going to have on an incredibly ecologically important wetland. And just a few days ago, the AER noted that further investigation of this matter indicated that the unplanned release of volume may have been closer to 10,000 cubic meters, and that Suncor had informed the AER that the unplanned release may in fact been in effect since June of 2022, and believe that the cause is likely to be a faulty valve. So, Mr. Pusher, forgive me if this sounds familiar, but it seems to me that the design of many of these tailings ponds is to be much like a sieve. And how could you tell this committee how much leakage from tailings ponds into the environment does the AER find acceptable?
The standards are that tailings ponds should contain tailings. I would note, I want to clarify, the Suncor pond you were referring to was not a tailings pond. It was a containment pond, one of the ponds designed to collect runoff and snowmelt and so on. The initial report in October was that there had been a release. What they discovered, and what we are continuing to review, is that the source is probably a faulty valve. They talk about the last time they actually released from that pond was the 2022 date that you referred to, and therefore they think it could have been that the faulty valve wasn't operational since the last time they released. It's important to note that all of the water that was discharged, let me rephrase that when testing the water in October that was being released as a result of this faulty valve, all of the release criteria for water release from those types of ponds were met with that water. So we continue to review that incident, and we'll do our best to be transparent with everyone involved. And I would also note that all of that information has been communicated directly to communities in the area.
Thank you. Well, of course, there's two issues that we're talking about with the Curl oil sand site. One, of course, which is the consistent seepage, and the other one, which is the overflow. And we know that thousands of cubic meters of this problematic fluid poured into the Muskeg and the Athabasca River because what seems to be a failure that could have been avoided. And it sounds very similar to this with the Suncor site. So could you tell this committee what were those events preventable? And if so, does the AER have a plan that will prevent these occurrences from happening again?
So I really want to correct what you just said. The overflow of the containment pond at Curl that occurred in February occurred at -30 temperatures. That water was contained. Most of it froze very swiftly, and none of it, there is no evidence that any of that water made its way to either the Firebag or Muskeg rivers. And so I think it's important we note that.
What were these events preventable? And what, if so, what is the AER doing to ensure that these events don't happen again?
Certainly an event of that magnitude constitutes an issue that we would investigate. There is an open and active investigation into that incident, and we will await the results of that.
So I understand that this release was 3 times above the approved levels for suspended solids, and I expect, and I would ask that the AER submits their response to this to ensure and to give the public confidence that these types of events, which again sound very similar from 2 separate sites, will not be happening again.
Okay. Merci. Monsieur Garon.
Thank you, Mr. Garon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, when we have this mining and spills, let's call a spade, have consequences, significant consequences on the health of the neighboring Indigenous nations. We've talked about bile duct cancer in the case of Gun Chief Adam. The University of Alberta has conducted investigations on the link between oil mining and cancers, and there have been disquieting findings. And some people know where the oil sands are, and they've seen them, such as my colleague, Ms. Goodrich, and they're members of the Fort Chipewyan Indigenous Nation who have asked for clarification on this matter. You began many of your sentences by, our role as a regulator is. Well, you seem to take your role very seriously. And Ms. Chattel talked about the public perception, which is that you are the industry regulator serving industry. You're by and for industry. You may agree or disagree with that, but this is what many people perceive. Do you believe that there will be any major regulatory reforms that should be necessary so that you could be in a better position to do your work and so that the public could have more trust in you?
Well, the regulatory standards, we have some influence on and some independent authority over those, and we'll continue to take whatever actions we deem appropriate to ensure that the systems are operated to the best of their ability. You know, I would note that when you get into the standards, you are talking in a large part, the standards is created and developed by the government of Alberta, and you know, it would be perhaps of value for this committee to have a discussion with representatives from the government of Alberta as it relates to any thoughts the committee might have on further strengthening those legislative or regulatory expectations as are presented in Alberta through the Legislative Assembly.
Backrack.
Mr. Pusher, you mentioned that the plume of contamination has been defined, and I would highly encourage you to share the data from that definition of the plume with the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation. They haven't yet received the definition of the plume, and I think a map and the data associated with it would be very important for them to receive as quickly as possible. Now, I wanted to touch on Suncor's expansion, the proposed expansion on top of the McClelland Wetlands Complex. This is a a ecologically valuable wetland that until 1996 was protected from development. Now Suncor is going to be allowed to mine half of it, store tailings in that area that has been mined. The number I've seen is 60 square kilometers of tailings ponds on top of the former wetland. And then to prevent seepage from the tailings facility into the remainder of the wetland, they're proposing to build a 70-meter deep impermeable wall down into the soil to prevent the groundwater from migrating from one side of the wetland to the other. And my question is whether you've heard of this approach being used elsewhere in the oil sands or elsewhere in Canada for managing the migration of groundwater between a tailings facility and a wetland.
I would reiterate that the mining of this part of the McClellan Lake wetlands was approved in the original federal provincial mine approval. What was approved a year ago was the strategy by which that mining would be conducted. It was approved after an extensive engineering design by the company, but also an extensive review by our technical experts to ensure we could have confidence that the mining operations would operate within the standards as outlined in the legislation and regulations. And we did an extra review in response to requests to reconsider that, and had an independent group within our organization go back through and revisit all of that information, and they concluded that the approval was appropriate and should continue.
Well, that you.
Just to note that there's been a bit of a theme here, which is that MPs are asking very specific questions. In this case, my specific question was whether a similar approach has been used elsewhere in Canada, and yet no answer was provided.
Okay.
And I just want to voice my frustration because we're trying to get answers on behalf of Canadians, on behalf of First Nations downstream, and yet no answer is forthcoming. It's frustrating.
Mr. Deltel.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
I think it's clear the answer.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for attending this committee. You came to see us 7 months ago and now we're back. Thank you very much. It's essential. Chair, generally speaking, we can say that if there's no water, there can be no environment. It's a key, basic element of every form of life and environmental quality. Water is essential, and we have to be careful with it. When, unfortunately, a spill occurs like what we saw in Curl, we can measure the impact on water, and it has to be measured immediately because it impacts everything else. In this context, we understand that you intervened when the situation occurred. And here's my question. What are your analysis protocols to analyze water on an ongoing basis for areas where there are oil exploitations, such as mining?
Extensive team of subject matter experts or technical experts who come to work every day to diligently review and assess what's happening across the landscape. We've certainly deployed a wide-ranging team to the Curl site as an example, as we saw an identified issue, and so we'll continue to deploy those resources to the best of our ability. But it's important that we learn and understand what is happening and build the best strategies to mitigate it continuing. I would note that monitoring of rivers and
Mr. Pusher,
Muskeg and Athabasca River continue to show no evidence of impacts from the Curl incident.
OK. Mais Monsieur Pusher, ma question n'est pas sur les événements qui sont survenus à Curl. On sait que vous êtes intervenu.
My question is not about what happened at Curl. I'm talking about assessing things before a situation arises. Because there can be leakage or seepage before major overflows are noticed, and things can attack the water in the wells or groundwater or our lakes and rivers or the water table. What is your organization doing so that on a regular basis, before problematic situations such as what happened at Curl happen, what does your organization do to assess the quality of the water surrounding areas where there is oil extraction?
So we have extensive oversight protocols around how we manage large projects such as these oil sands mines. Each year, a specific mine inspection plan is put in place. Our lead for each mine site has access to any and all experts they deem appropriate to support them in that oversight. They will do a series of site visits. In addition to that, we will also examine what the company is doing in terms of their monitoring and operational plans and procedures to ensure they are operating at the standards we expect them to. And all of that information informs what regulatory actions we may or may not feel are necessary to be taken. And those regulatory actions can be as simple as saying this issue needs to be addressed, or this thing we found needs to be fixed, all the way through to significant penalties and operational consequences. So we do a diligent and extensive review of what we believe our technical experts believe is the right oversight for each site on an annual basis.
Monsieur le Président, c'est pas demain matin qu'on n'aura plus besoin du pétrole dans nos vies, simplement.
Tomorrow morning, we're still going to need oil. And even in Quebec, we have 18 billion liters of oil have been used. It's on page 1 of the Devoir. You know, it was a shocking headline. So as long as we need oil, we're going to need Canada's oil because it's ours. So how can we be sure that things are done properly? The tragedy that happened in Curl is a severe warning for all of us. We must therefore ensure that this doesn't happen again, and that when something happens, it's possible to take proper measures in response. But assessment also has to be done regularly. Evaluations have to be done, maybe not 10 times a day, but regularly. Maybe unannounced analyses of water quality near areas where there's oil drilling or oil exploration, which is oil which is used by Canadians and people abroad. We have to be sure that the quality of water is relevant. So can you tell us, Chair of the Alberta Energy Regulator Committee, can you tell us today whether water analyses are carried out around areas where oil is being drilled in Canada?
We have an extensive responsibility to see what is happening out on the landscape, and we can compel a company to do whatever we think is appropriate or required in any specific instance. There is monitoring done around all of the oil sands sites. I think it would be a bit of a stretch to think you would extend every single well site in a conventional oil and gas industry. Would require some kind of independent monitoring, but we do have high expectations of the way companies perform and contain all of the fluids they manage in any operation anywhere across the land. And I would just end by encouraging you to take the member from Fort McMurray up on her offer to look at the regional monitoring website she was referring to and see what the air quality looks like, see what the water quality reporting is.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Last but not least, Mr. Vancouver.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'll just start where I finished off last time with respect to accountability between industry or the regulator or really anyone. It's clear to me that there's been no clear admission of fault or true accountability here. I haven't heard of anybody losing their job or really facing the facts here. So if the AER isn't accountable and not one person at Imperial or the AER has lost their job, who ought to be accountable for this or future leakages?
Well, as I've indicated, both of these matters are under investigation, and an investigation will lead to whatever consequences or ramifications for Imperial that the investigative team deems are appropriate. It would be inappropriate for me to speculate or comment further around accountability, but there are robust investigations underway, and they will be fully transparent in sharing the findings of those investigations at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Pusher. Now, we've seen this, and it's been referred to as the biggest leak in Alberta's history, the largest amount of contaminated effluent that's ever entered an ecosystem. It's also been referred to as the largest cover-up ever in Alberta's oil sands history. I've also been to Fort McMurray and and I'm happy to go back. I'd be glad to visit again. But what I saw was an environmental disaster unfolding, and I don't think I'm the only one that feels that exact same way, Mr. Pusher. Now, Premier Daniel Smith has claimed that the Alberta oil sands represent the safest, the most ethical, and the cleanest fossil fuel extraction in the world. And yet today, we, for the last 2 hours, have been discussing one of the worst environmental disasters that our country has ever seen. Do you believe that it's true that the Alberta oil sands continue to represent the safest, most ethical, and cleanest fossil fuel extraction in the world, despite all the evidence that we've been hearing about today and over the last couple of months?
Well, I can tell you that the standards that we at the AER are expected to hold industry to comply with are world leading. I would also note that you continue to refer to this as the largest impact. It may be by volume, but I would remind you that the recovery of that fluid was extremely high because of the fact that it occurred at -30 and was mostly runoff, and so it froze upon release. We will do our best to take the lessons from this and make sure that we continue to improve and strengthen the operations of ourselves at the AER and do the best we can for the people of Alberta. We will interact with our colleagues at the Government of Alberta where we see and feel there may be needs for regulatory enhancements, and we will work to support our colleagues as they do that. And we will come to work every day to ensure that the people in Fort McMurray know that there's a regulator on the job, ensuring industry is complying to the expectations all Albertans have for that industry. And that's the role of the regulator. And while I get criticized from some on some sides of the ledger, I can assure you I get criticized from all sides, and that is the life of a regulator, and we accept that willingly, and we understand that that's our role. But be assured, there's 1,000 people at the Alberta Energy Regulator who get up every day and intend and do diligently their best to ensure industries complying with the standards Albertans expect them to.
Thanks, Mr. Pusher. I just note that it's not just Albertans, it's Canadians, and I just want to note that there has been evidence of these contaminants reaching as far north as the Northwest Territories and elsewhere, so it's not the case that they just froze in place. But I thank you for your testimony, and I thank you for being willing to be criticized. It's a public job, so it's very important. Mr. Chair, I believe there's been a notice of motion distributed to the clerk, and if I have the indulgence of the chair, then I'd read that motion.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much. Whereas the Alberta Energy Regulator failed to contain a tailings pond seepage while waiting 7 months for a geochemistry study to be completed, whereas the Alberta Energy Regulator has referred to this disaster as a communications problem, yet failed to communicate the impacts of this spill to impacted communities and other levels of government, whereas the Alberta Energy Regulator previously claimed that there was no contaminants found in the waterways when in fact Imperial staff told ACFN inspectors that dissolved iron was found in water body 3, and on April 3rd, 2023, that a test showed F2 hydrocarbons and naphthenic acids in the water body. That the committee express its disappointment with the Alberta Energy Regulator and acknowledge that the Alberta Energy Regulator has been deficient in protecting the environment and health of communities adjacent to tailings ponds that it regulates. That in relation to the committee's study of freshwater and following the evidence provided by witnesses regarding the toxic leak of tailings ponds and ongoing deficiencies in protecting the health and safety of Indigenous communities at risk, this committee call upon the Alberta Energy Regulator and the Government of Alberta to work with companies that operate tailings ponds, and that the federal government conduct a study to assess the impacts of tailings ponds on human health. 2, call on the Alberta Energy Regulator to require operators of tailings ponds to increase monitoring of adjacent drinking water sources. 3, call on the Alberta Energy Regulator to conduct a geotechnical audit of all tailings limits. 4, call on the Alberta Energy Regulator to require operators of tailings ponds to halt the release of tailings into all waterways. And 5, make formal recommendations in its study of freshwater to improve the protection of Canada's freshwater resources from contamination from tailings ponds. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are you just giving notice, or are you moving this for debate?
I would move it. It's on the table. I would move it.
You're moving it.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Mazier had his hand up, I think.
Just recess for a second.
Yeah. Yes.
I think unless we're in committee business, are we in committee business?
Well, you don't
currently?
have to, I don't think you have to be in committee
Well, you
business.
need 48 hours notice.
Well, not when it relates to the topic we're discussing. Okay. But we're going to break for a second here, yeah.
So, Mr.
Thank you,
Chair.
Okay, we've had a new participant join from Fort McMurray, I think. Okay, so Mr. Mazier, you asked for, you have nothing more to say, you just asked for recess. We'll go to Mr. Deltel.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. After the 2 hours that we spent, where we learned many things and that questions were highly relevant and that we went right to the heart of the matter from several points of view, which was worthwhile, I'm very glad that we spoke about water quality and evaluations that will be done at all times, not just when there's a tragedy, but when there can be surprise checks, whether we're talking about water courses, rainwater, surface water. So I think we went into quite a good deal of depth, and I'm very pleased. I am surprised that the government is proposing a motion to go even further. What we note in the motion as presented by our ministerial colleagues is that the 5 elements that they're asking for at the end, if you remove the last one, which says that it be part of an assessment, the 4 previous ones contain what? Look at that motion very clearly that our colleagues have tabled. Excuse me. Is this a point of order? What motion are we talking about here? Because my colleague is talking about a government motion. I don't really understand. I thought that we were debating our motion here. It's from the government group. I'd like to call your attention to the fact that you are in the government. So let's get back to the points. Thank you. And where do you see me? I'm very proud of the mandates you have. Ladies and gentlemen, let's continue on and stick to the subject at hand. In the motion presented by our government friends, I thought it was the word friends that took you off guard. But by our departmental ministerial colleagues, there are 5 demands at the end. If we remove number 5, which is a summary to see what we're going to do about our current study, I understand that. But the 4 others, the 4 previous demands, what is the word that we see, or what are the words that we see most frequently in the 4? It's the Alberta Energy Regulator. Chair, perhaps I'm mistaken, but the Alberta Energy Regulator is a provincial institution of the province of Alberta. And we are at the House of Commons of the Government of Canada. We are dealing with Canada here. It's federal and not provincial. So if our government colleagues are so interested in what's happening in the provinces in Alberta, well, then run for election. And good luck. Good luck.
What's happening here in the House of Commons? Focus on what's happening in the House of Commons under the federal jurisdiction. But not what we're talking about with this motion. On the 5 elements that they are asking for at the end of this motion, 4 of them have in their mandate the words Alberta Energy Regulator. Mr. Speaker, this is the House of Commons of Canada. We are here on the federal level. And those people are asking us to scrutinize what had happened of a provincial body of Alberta. If they are so interested, in the provincial politics in Alberta, well, go on. I'm sure there will be some by-election in a row. Or maybe you could run in the next general election. Good luck, buddy. Good luck. We never know. Democracy is democracy. Maybe you could be elected in Alberta. Maybe. I don't know. I will let the people decide. But the thing is sure, Mr. Speaker, here, first and foremost, as a federal member of parliament, I want to focus on where I have real power on. Monsieur le Président, c'est un peu comme si, d'aventure.
Chair, it's as though we were to look at Quebec. Point of order. Excuse me, Mr. Deltel.
Just like to call the member's attention to the Constitution Act of 1867, which states that...
This isn't really a point of order. No, this is...
Well,
constitutional law. So I think I won't. I think we'll have to move on, go back to Mr. Deltel.
The preface of his entire.
Yeah, but that's not about the rules of the committee. It's about the constitution of the country. I don't want to open that right now. So we'll go.
Monsieur, oui. Merci.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to give an example of what could happen in Quebec. But first of all, let's look at the following reality. It seems that this government has a fierce appetite for putting its nose into things that aren't its business, especially when it comes to the environment. Need I remind my government colleagues that my colleagues got bad news from our legal system, that they're going to have to review some of their decisions? Don't forget that the Supreme Court of Canada called the government to order regarding C-69. And this is a very personal example for Quebec. Well, I have nothing personal in it, but I mean, it's important for Quebec, which is that the federal government gave itself the autocratic power to conduct environmental assessments of major hydroelectric projects. And as a Quebecer, I'm very proud of our major projects that have been developed in the 1950s, carried out in the 60s, redeveloped in the 70s, including James Bay. I'm very proud of the major advances we made as a Quebec nation when it comes to hydroelectricity. But with Bill C-69, the federal government brought itself into the process to impose point of order. Excuse me, Mr. Deltel. Madame Châtel. Regarding this motion, if there is work to be done with the Energy Board, with the Alberta Energy Regulator, if, according to Mr. Deltel, the committee does not have the authority to talk about this in our water study, and we should limit ourselves to each individual who only operates under federal jurisdiction, I don't understand why the committee is being limited to interacting only with federal stakeholders rather than provincial stakeholders. That's not a point of order. That's not a point of order. But I don't understand the point that's being debated. It's just a question of clarification. Mr. Deltel is talking about the motion. And it's talking about energy, and Mr. Deltel is talking about hydroelectricity. It's okay. You can continue. Chair, I'd be tempted to repeat for a third time the historic review of the development of hydroelectric projects in Quebec, but as I've already done it twice, I'm not going to do it a third time. But thank you very much for your invitation to discuss energy and hydroelectric energy. We're very proud of this in Quebec, and I'm sure our Mirabel colleague is very impressed that we developed this potential because, of course, geography worked in our favor with all these rivers, and we had very lucid decisions that were made in the 1950s and 40s so that we had our first nationalization of Hydro-Quebec, the creation of Hydro-Quebec, and all of the development that took place in the 1940s and 50s, Beauharnois, for example, and Bersimis River, Manicouagan, and the river next to it. We had major hydroelectric developments. Point of order.
It looks like we may not get to the vote today, but I'm wondering, are we adjourning at 1:30 as well?
1:30 by my phone here, not by that clock, because that's a little fast.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to clarify.
At 1:30, we're done.
It'd be great to get to a vote, but I'm sure
our resources will have
almost
depleted and comes to a stop.
Oui. Le point de mon argument, Monsieur le
The point of my argument, Chair, is to say that we're at the federal level here, and it's important to deal with federal issues and not matters that are provincial. And the government has quite the habit of inviting itself into jurisdictions that are not its own, especially when it comes to the environment. So I was just reminding us about Bill 69, in which the federal government gave itself the power to decree without consulting anybody, especially not the provinces, to have environmental assessments about major hydroelectric projects. Unless you're building a dam on the St. Lawrence Seaway, which is under federal jurisdiction, I don't even think it would happen there. So, as has been done for a full century with great success, it's been provincial jurisdiction. But now the government has given itself this power. Power to do what? To redo what's already being done in Quebec for the environment. Environmental assessment is being done by the BAP in Quebec, and it's done with scientists, and they come to a conclusion, either yes or no. And here, the federal government, under the helm of this prime minister for the last 8 years, thinks that people in Ottawa are smarter than people in Quebec, and they're going to do a better assessment. No, Chair. The idea is just causing redundancy and delaying the work. And we know we all have the objective of reducing pollution, reducing emissions, of living in a greener environment, and to decarbonize as long as we can. Well, that involves using new technology and green energy and hydroelectricity for those who have the potential to have it. So, Chair, this government has given itself a vocation that is not of its own, and the Supreme Court has called it to order. What? It's only a week or two ago. The same thing happened with the federal court regarding the use of plastics, single-use plastics. And here again, this was overturned by another level of the courts. The government isn't happy, so they're going to appeal. Okay, that's its right and privilege. They're using it. Okay, fine. But, Chair, one after the other, we've seen the Supreme Court and federal court who have been telling the government when it comes to the environment, it is shared. So split it properly between what's federal and what's provincial, which unfortunately wasn't done. But, Chair, it's never too late to do the right thing. We know that the federal government the Alberta government, rather, has suggested certain measures regarding Alberta sovereignty. And yesterday, the Ministry of the Environment said, no, it's okay, I'm not getting involved. Oh, never too late to do the right thing. After 2 pushbacks from the legal system, the government finally looked at the Constitution and said, oh, it's not up to us to do it, and we'll let them do it. Well, if people don't like it, they'll be voted out. And if people are really unhappy, they can run for election. If my department colleagues are not happy with what's happening in Alberta, well, if you want to run for office, good luck to you. So I'd like to go back to something important, Chair. Now, 4 times I've been offering my Liberal colleagues, the opportunity to run for office in Alberta. I seem to understand that there is not going to be great enthusiasm. There's not going to be a lot of people running to run against. In any case, Hydro-Quebec, if there's a situation that is not something that leads to unanimity, are we at the federal government going to say we better call Hydro-Quebec here and put them on the bench and bing, bang, boom, we'll do the job? No, there are layers, there are levels at which it's possible. There are places that are for this, and in Quebec, it's the Legislative Assembly, l'Assemblée nationale. And I think in Newfoundland they call it a National Assembly also, and rather than a Legislative Assembly. But I may be mistaken. I don't want to wander into constitutional law, and if I have, I'm very sorry. My apologies. So the issue in the motion presented by my department colleagues, I mean, maybe there's an area, but in our minds, this is an intrusion. There's another point of order.
Time check on where we're at?
It's 1:26.
1:26, 4 more minutes. Okay. Thank you.
Chair, if I was shockable or upset, I would be very upset that my colleague was asking what time it is, as though he was eager to know if I could finish already. But what about the respective jurisdictions? That's what I'm talking about. So, Chair, in order to make a long story short and get right to the heart of things, if the motion, as written, and as it concludes, because we can debate parts of elements that are in the premise of the motion, but what the motion is requesting, in 4 out of 5 times, it is concerning an entity which is of provincial jurisdiction in Alberta. You could be in favor of this or against this. You could be severe about what they're doing. You could be complacent about their re-election. Everyone has their own judgment, but I think we all, whichever party we're from, whether we're in government or the opposition party, we've done our job well, and I'd like to congratulate the participant from Fort McMurray who was the first to be affected by the events that are affected at Curl. Point of order.
I'm just trying to understand something that Mr. D'Altalo was saying. Could I
Well,
just ask a question?
a point of
you?
clarification, I guess you can always, can you just interject and
I just
ask
wanted
for
to
clarification?
be clear on something because you're
Not a point
the
of
premise
order,
of what
it's a
you're
point of
saying.
Well, I'll be flexible, but if you could.
It'll
keep
be
it-
short. It'll be short.
If you could keep it
Thank
brief,
you.
yeah.
Thank you. Could you just pouvez-vous m'expliquer si
Could you explain to me whether the environment is only provincial responsibility? Point of order. If there is any shared responsibility between the two levels of government. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I appreciate the fact that you asked me the question in French. And Chair, I'm sorry that I went over you, but I'll allow myself to answer right away. Ms. Taylor-Roy is right. The environmental is not just one jurisdiction, but two. So that's why it's important to share the waters properly. And I'm not talking about a biblical story here. At some point, it's provincial, and at another point, it's federal. In this specific case of the motion presented by Mr. Van Coverden, directly, it's provincial. Why? Because of the 5 numbered points in the motion, aside from the last one, which is a conclusion, saying it has to be part of our work, the other 4 target exclusively, directly, and specifically the Alberta Energy Regulator. So, prima facie, using the very words Alberta, well, we're talking about Alberta.
We're not talking about federal jurisdiction. We're not talking about House of Commons. We're not talking about the Federal Committee of Environmental and Climate Change Issues. We are talking about Alberta. Well, guys, if you want to run for the Alberta, good
Is it a
luck.
point of order,
but
Mr.
this is the
Montiel?
House of
Okay.
Commons of Canada.
Mr. Chair, I move to suspend the meeting.
Okay, okay, there's a move to suspend.
Dilatory motion.
She didn't have the floor. You were still talking. The meeting hadn't finished.
So
Or-
before
but
we
you know what?
Before we adjourn, then I'd move that.
Okay, yeah, where were we, Mr. Delto?
So I have, what, 26 seconds? Around that? I would have preferred 36. You know why? Because in 1972, on September the 28th, 36 seconds because the end of the 8th game between USSR and Canada, Paul Anderson scored the most important goal in the Canadian history.
Guess what? It's 1:30, and my question to the committee, yes, there's a request to suspend the meeting. Does everyone agree to suspend?
34 seconds, not 36, sorry.
Is there? Okay, so what we just did. I'm going to stop here, and yeah, we're gonna have to adjourn. I'm sorry, we're gonna have to adjourn and take this up, I guess, next time.